Welcome to Surgeon Syndicate. If you're paying attention, you know that you only make money when you work. It might be great money, but it's dependent on you. The information on this podcast will help you solve that. We interview experts and provide analysis into financial freedom through commercial real estate. Why? To help physicians like you thrive. Let's dive in.
Welcome to Surgeon Syndicate. This is your host, Dr. Michael McManus. And today we're going to dive into what might be a little bit more controversial topic. I've had people been asking me about it on a lot of different levels, and that's cannabis or marijuana. This all kind of started because as a doctor, there's a lot of newer evidence coming out about some of the benefits of cannabis versus narcotics or versus NSAIDs or versus lots of other things. But we're not going to be talking about the medical side of it today. Because as I was trying to give some better answers to patients who were asking about it and dug into it, I started seeing some investment opportunities. And so I just wanted to dig into a little deeper into this sub market of investing because it's really a higher risk, higher reward. And we'll kind of talk about why. And basically, the cannabis industry has been growing extraordinarily over the last several years, over the last decade, as different states make it legal. But on the other side, it's still illegal at a national level. So there's this conflict between those two things because of how it's been growing. But there's this conflict with federal law. There's been limited availability of compliant properties. And some of the ones that are already in have really blown up a lot in value. And so the regulatory aspect of this, so it's illegal at a federal level. There's only about I think a dozen states left now that there isn't some sort of legal cannabis, but then it's also regulated at a municipal level as to whether there can be dispensaries, there can be growing operations, and we'll get into all these different real estate classifications a little bit later on. But all of this creates a situation where there's a lot of uncertainty about what may or may not happen in the future. So we're going to go through some of the pros and cons of why this is a good asset class to invest in. We'll talk about some of the different ways that it can be financed. And then we'll also talk about some of the different types of investments because just like farming, there's a whole different ways that there's multiple different opportunities to invest here if it's something that's interesting to people. So the pros, why this is a good investment. High demand, limited supply. So as we discussed, this has been a booming business over the past decade or more, but because of the regulatory environment, you can't just set up shop anywhere. And what that means is there's a limited availability of where you can put in any type of cannabis operation through the whole business cycle. So that's what leads to the high demand. Another reason is it's a diversification of a portfolio. Cannabis so far has operated completely buffered to the rest of the economy. Haven't seen a lot of ups and downs with the rest of the economy. So it kind of gives a nice economic buffer. Also, portfolio enhancement, meaning that these investments tend to do a little bit better because of this whole supply and demand and because of the added risk. They tend to add a little bit of juice to your portfolio. Like a lot of commercial things that we talk about here with retail and industrial, they do tend to be longer term leases. You're not signing 1 and 2 year leases. And with these types of leases, you can also build in some growth potential, which shares revenue with your tenants. What that does is often if they're coming in cash poor and you can help them get started with lower leases, but as they grow, their leases go up. Those types of things can help improve them return on these investments. They tend to get premium rents compared to other factors. And again, that's because there's only limited places, not only limited landlords that will lease to cannabis operations, but most cities have set up where there is a cannabis friendly zone or a cannabis restricted zone that they can only set up any type of cannabis facility in very defined areas. What that does is if you own a building in that area, you've got a premium rent. They can't go down the street 3 blocks if that's outside of the area. And so you've kind of got a captive market. Now, a lot of them, they're fine paying premium rents because these can be very profitable operations, making this good for both the landlord and the tenant. But then why wouldn't we want to do it? We got into this a little bit. Federal versus state conflict at all levels here. This is still an illegal operation as far as the federal government's concerned. And so far, the federal government has chosen to not enforce over states that have made it okay. I'm not aware that there's been any type of Supreme Court clarification on this. And so we still are kind of rolling along on this that it's okay at a state level, you can do it, but we don't know what the feds will do. Now, to me, it seems like where the momentum's going here, it's very unlikely we would see the Fed step in. But as we all know, you get changes in politics and things may change. If there were big changes in this, that would mean huge changes to the entire marijuana industry and could affect landlords. Now, depending on what type of operation and what other risks there are if you need to backfill a tenant. This goes with any tenant. If your tenant goes out of business, part of when you're leasing up, sometimes you can get higher rent from worse tenants because you're taking on the risk of will they make it, and you're going to pay lower and more premium tenants that know that people want them can negotiate lower rents. So if you look at this from a bigger picture and you can say, okay, I can get premium rents from a cannabis operation, but what if this gets moved out? So there, the standard real estate risk of backfilling is one risk, but sometimes, and this is where we don't know, and there's not a lot of precedent to say what would happen. But if you look at other drug operations that were purely illegal, when there's a Fed raid, they can seize all the assets associated with it. So it may not just be the marijuana operation, they may seize your property with it too. I think this is the biggest concern for real estate investors is what would happen if there were a big federal change and they came in and started seizing property. Another concern, market volatility. Now, some of the things that can happen there is there's bigger players coming in here. This mostly isn't a mom and pop operation anymore. There may be some opportunities there, to start businesses. I don't know it that well, but as you see bigger players come in, what I have seen is smaller growing operations become unprofitable as bigger players come in and reduce costs, like in a lot of industry. When you get a relatively new industry, there's more opportunity for some of these big changes. So your leasee paying premium rents could go from being very profitable to not profitable with some of these shifts that continue to happen. Now, some of this depends on the state. As new states allow marijuana that haven't in the past, this could change. The dynamics when it first starts are like anything. It can be like a gold rush where it's a rush for people to get set up and get going and establish their ground. But even then, that can change over time. So, what that says is this is an area to understand what's going on locally in the industry as far as regulation, as far as where cities want to allow operations, if it's outside the city and grow operations, where counties want to allow such operations, how cannabis friendly are the local politicians? Is this something they see as bad or good for the future of the community? And then at the state level, how are the state politicians looking at this? And is this something they're dipping their toe in and they're feeling like it may pull back, or that they're really wanting to move forward with it? And again, keeping an eye at the federal level, nobody really knows if there will be a change there, but you got to be listening in a situation like this to pay attention what's going on. Now, one of the next big hurdles is financing. And that's because banks are regulated at a federal level. For the most part, standard banks are not participating in cannabis operations of any kind or any cannabis properties, which means then you have to look at alternative financing. And we'll get into financing here in the next section. And then the final one is the stigma. This is back when I was a kid, that there was a very different perception of marijuana and who used it. And although there were wide swaths of people using it across cultures and spectrums, it was a very different place. Now, in certain parts of the country, in certain towns, there's still the stigma, and some towns don't want it. And it's something they say they don't want. But then when they open the doors, and we've seen this recently in parts of Michigan that border Wisconsin, since Wisconsin's not a marijuana state, and we have practices in some of these areas, and some towns near the border didn't want to bring it in, but then they finally shifted and said yes. And then it's like the gold rush again. You get these businesses rushing in and setting up. The areas in some of these were areas that really there wasn't much going on. And I think that was part of the decision. And a couple examples I have in mind that, there were industrial parts of town that really weren't recovering from their glory days. And when the city opened up and said, okay, we're going to allow cannabis operations, they said you can only do it in this part of town. And all of a sudden, rundown properties all of a sudden had this huge value. Now, if somebody had made that bet ahead of time, they would have done quite well. But that stigma is still something that limits the business and the operational restrictions. Again, as we talked, most cities limit and counties will limit where you can operate such a business.
We'll get back to our show in just a minute, but first I want to offer you an opportunity to accelerate your learning. My life changed, and my ability to start becoming work optional changed when I gained the people and the knowledge to start investing in commercial real estate. One of the key people there was Ash Patel and joining his Invest Beyond multifamily mastermind. Well, that mastermind is no longer open, but for a fraction of the price, Ash has now made a course. And this is probably the most valuable set of information and quickest way to move along your learning curve. So if you are interested in actively investing in commercial real estate and retail and industrial and office, I would recommend this course to you. We're going to include a pre-sale link both in the show notes. It'll also be on the surgeonsyndicate.com website. And in your checkout, I'll save you another 1%. I know it's not a lot, but every little bit helps if you use the discount code Mike1487. If you're not interested in investing actively, give us a call here at Fortress Capital, and let's talk about what your goals are as a passive investor. But it's time to stop listening, start acting, and let's move your future forward.
So, funding. How do you fund an operation if you can't get bank financing? So, one of the primary ones is private lenders. Private lenders are kind of like in real estate. There are a lot of private cash lenders outside of banks. They tend to charge higher interest rates. That's part of being a private lender. That's another way we'll get into a little bit of how to invest in cannabis. Most private lender notes, especially in cannabis, tend to be shorter term. And that's really because these can be such cash flowing operations that the money's needed to get set up. But the lenders are saying, hey, I want higher interest rates. I want my money back faster, because the quicker they can come out of that deal again decreases their risk of being a political shift against what's going on. Now, there's also REITs that specialize in cannabis. And as what this is basically a bigger private lender where somebody's gone out and they've got investors put together. All those investors are putting their money in, and now they're loaning that money out to either some sort of cannabis operators, or they may be buying cannabis businesses or cannabis real estate along with loaning money, seller financing, as in many other parts of both buying and selling businesses and real estate. What typically happens here is either, it's like any other business. Somebody's got the business and they've decided they just want to move along, but they're happy to receive some ongoing income rather than a lump of cash at once. Or it may be that was part of their business structure is they're startup experts. They come in, they wade through all these things and all this difficulty of what it takes to get a cannabis operation up and running. And once they have it up and running, they sell it and they finance it. And basically that financing is their ongoing income, kind of like REITs crowdfunding and syndications. We already talked about REITs, but really they're essentially the same thing as a REIT, except the regulatory aspect of how it's set up is a little different. But again, this is pooling money together to provide an investment opportunity, which could be through purchase or lending. As I look to get information on this, and I'm looking for, what are the expert opinions and the future outlook? I think the general consensus on this at this point is that the momentum is going in one direction, and we will see increased legalization. Will the federal government leave this as a gray zone for forever, or will they move forward with legalization? Nobody knows that. Maybe somebody in the federal government, but they're not talking to me. Um, and we see in some states where there's also been increased legalization of things like hallucinogens, and some of these are being used in a lot of different ways for psychotherapy. And I had this really interesting discussion over the weekend. I was at a conference who somebody who's a holistic psychiatric practitioner, and I don't know, it's just fascinating to me how they're using some of these different drugs that have been around for a long time in different ways and combining them with psychotherapy to get some really interesting, that sounded like amazing results. Even for them though, they're still sorting through people who are showing up saying they want to do this drug enhanced psychotherapy, but are really just looking to do some drugs and have a way to do it. So I don't know. The only reason I bring that up, it's a really interesting thing from a medical standpoint. But as you see things moving in that direction, it makes it difficult to think that we're going to go backwards in the cannabis world, but nobody really knows. So how can you invest in cannabis? You say, you know what? I agree. I think this is the momentum's going in one direction. It's somewhere I want. I'll take that added risk because I don't think it's a risk, and I want to earn increased returns associated with it. So this kind of like farming and food is really the way this goes. Or you could follow the tobacco industry because it's very similar. There's cultivation facilities. What are these? These are where you farm cannabis. There's not, from my understanding as I looked, I didn't see a whole lot of outdoor operations, that most of these are indoor. It's probably because, they're getting improved grow rates. If you can control your environment, it also decreases risk of theft, which is one of the bigger risks for cultivation facilities. Is these tend to be in more rural locations. I haven't seen any data on it. I looked for it, but I have heard stories about having break-ins and stealing product from cultivation facilities. And again, they've said for that regulatory risk, but that's one place to invest, is in where they're actually growing. The next place is processing facilities. This isn't the 70s anymore. People aren't just smoking pot. And because there are so many different ways that it's being sold, and the extraction on some of these are pretty incredible, the amount and what they make out of it. So they're not wasting really any product here that has the ability to extract some of the different types of cannabinoids and put them into different products. So there are processing facilities are where this is done, and each of these processing facilities may do a wide spectrum of things or may be more focused. So if somebody was, looking to be an investor and they were deeper in this industry, they may look at, what type of processing facility they like, or may use that to diversify against different types of processing facilities. After processing, you have distribution, and this is kind of like a warehouse, like any other industry, except they tend to be more restricted to just cannabis because of all the regulatory things. Now, some places may skip the distribution center and may be going directly from production facility or processing straight to retail stores. And that's the next step, is dispensaries or retail stores. This is probably the one everybody sees the most of, are the actual stores. I've seen these for sale as a group of facilities or a portfolio of facilities, and also single facilities for sale. Again, from a real estate investor standpoint, we're looking at buying the retail, the retail space, just like a retail store. And I've seen opportunities out there where you can buy the store and the real estate, or the two are split apart if you just want to be a real estate investor. Another one I found interesting that I hadn't seen it actually as advertised anything for sale are research facilities. And some of these go alongside some of the processing facilities because the research facilities where they're learning to make new times. And then the last one before we wrap up here is just land for future development. As the industry grows, it'll need additional land. So there are some opportunities there to invest. This is like doing any development is a little higher risk. So I hope this has been helpful. I just wanted to introduce people to this because I've had a few discussions about it recently. If you have any questions, reach out. I'll do my best to explain, but maybe together we could find some better experts because I'm not really an expert in this area, but I wanted to give an introduction to you. And again, thank you for joining us today on Surgeon Syndicate.
We'll get back to our show in just a minute, but first I want to offer you an opportunity to accelerate your learning. My life changed and my ability to start becoming work optional changed when I gained the people and the knowledge to start investing in commercial real estate. One of the key people there was Ash Patel and joining his Invest Beyond Multifamily Mastermind. Well, that mastermind is no longer open, but for a fraction of the price, Ash has now made a course. And this is probably the most valuable set of information and quickest way to move along your learning curve. So if you are interested in actively investing in commercial real estate and retail and industrial and office, I would recommend this course to you. We're going to include a pre-sale link both in the show notes. It'll also be on the surgeonsyndicate.com website. And in your checkout, I'll save you another 1%. I know it's not a lot, but every little bit helps if you use the discount code Mike1487. If you're not interested in investing actively, give us a call here at Fortress Capital and let's talk about what your goals are as a passive investor. But it's time to stop listening, start acting, and let's move your future forward.
This has been an episode of Surgeon Syndicate. If you got value from this episode, you know other surgeons are hungry to become job optional, and you can help them by sharing this content today. Schedule a call and we can make a plan. Looking forward to having you with me on the next episode.